Hi you guys, I'm so excited today to share with you my 10 tips for teachers. This could be teachers new, teachers that have been teaching for a really long time. These are the things that have worked for me and that have kept me really excited every day coming to school. And they are also tips that have helped me to take care of myself so that I don't get super burnt out and tired day after day. So as usual, take these tips with a grain of salt because what works for me might not work for you. I hope you find a couple helpful tips that will help you be the best teacher you can be this year. My tip number 1 is to set boundaries. What I mean by that is really thinking about the time that you spend inside of the school. Now, if you're like me, you probably feel like your classroom is your second home. I love to be in my classroom. The days when we just can work in our classroom, I could spend hours and hours there. Like, it is my second home. But I have been really lucky that I also coach my high school dance team. And I've coached the dance team before I even got my first teaching job. So I knew right when I started teaching that certain days when the dance season ran, so from October through February, a couple days a week, I had to leave school right at 3:30. And so that motivated me to get to school early in the morning. And here's a little insider tip. If you are a morning person or if you can become a morning person, the half hour or 40 minutes before all of the teachers get to school is like this magical time. It's so peaceful, and I'm not tempted to get distracted to go talk to teammates or to just kind of cruise around, see what's going on. I am just in my classroom at 7 a.m. Go, go, go. I prep anything that I need that day. So I always write my morning message that we read during morning meeting. I get out our morning tubs, anything else that I don't have ready for that day, I make sure I get done. And then if I still have extra time, I start prepping for the next day, or I start making copies for the rest of the week for phonics, or I start doing a craft and prepping the paper that we'll need for that craft. So that way I get really ahead, and it's super helpful because I'm just motivated in the morning, right? My coffee's kicked in. I'm like, let's do this. Here we go. And I found that at the end of the day, it's the exact opposite, where I am like so tired, I don't get anything done. What I found is my first year and second year teaching, I felt really guilty when I would leave right at the end. Even though I knew I was putting in the time and the love and the effort into my classroom, I felt like other teachers were thinking, who's this new girl who thinks she can just leave at 3:30? But I have found now after a couple of years that the days that I do stay until like 3:45 or 4 o'clock, most of the teachers leave about 15 minutes after the kids do. So don't think that you are the one leaving and everybody's judging you, because that's not the case. I feel like, at least at my school, the teachers all support each other and they're like, you do what you need to do. You're here to teach and be an awesome teacher, but when it's time to go home, it's time to go home. And believe me, there is always something to do. So just make sure you set boundaries. Have a couple days a week where you tell yourself, I'm going to leave right at 3:45 and I'll be fine. The next day will happen. It'll work, okay? And then other days, maybe you do want to stay until 4:30 or put in some time, but set boundaries. Tip number 2 goes off of tip number 1, and that's try to leave your schoolwork at school. I think this is a little bit easier for sure for kindergarten because I don't have papers to grade and I don't have things like that that are coming home with me. Most of the things that I would need to prep, I have to be in the classroom to do it. So this hasn't been a huge problem, but I know my first couple of years there would be things that I would bring home and then my brain would just get so tired and I'd be like, oh, I'm still working on this, right? So try to leave it at school and make yourself a list at the beginning of the day of all the things that you can get done. And then when you go home, let it be your home time. There's certain things like scholastic book orders, I'll take them home and I will look through them for ever and show like, look at how cute this book is. And I'm just like all about it. And I like to staple multiple different book orders together and put a little note, and that kind of stuff I like to do. So I'll bring it home and I'll be watching TV while I do it, like The Bachelorette, let's go. But there's certain things that you can get it done at school. You just have to make time. So use your prep really wisely. I know for me, the second that I sit down for prep, it's so hard to get up. There will be days that you definitely need to like sit down and eat all the chocolate and just like chill for a prep. But for the most time, if I'm just going and I know exactly what I want to work on, it's easier for me to just get that all done. So definitely think about just making checklists so that you can be super organized with what you need to do so that you don't have to bring as much schoolwork home. Tip number 3 is don't be afraid to ask questions, ask for help, and to share your ideas. My first year, the school that I was teaching at, I felt like because I was new, I had so much to prove, and I didn't want to seem like I was asking for help or that I needed help. I wanted to act like I was Superwoman, like I could just do it all, and that's not true. My first year was tricky, and the team that I worked with, they are all amazing teachers, but I felt like I was nagging them whenever I needed help with some sort of behavior in my classroom or with curriculum. We did not have a curriculum for phonics or literacy at this school at that time. And all I could think about was, how do I teach them sight words? How do I do this? How do I do that? And okay, I'm not a grandma, but at that time, I feel like Teachers Pay Teachers and Pinterest were not really like the hip happening thing, or maybe I was just out of the loop at that time. But I just felt like I was on my own little island, and it was super hard. So my advice for you is to just be upfront and tell them, I'm really struggling with X, Y, and Z. Can you help me with this? Or how did you teach this concept? And I would say 100% of the time, teachers want to help you. They've been there. They've been the new teacher. They know what it's like, and they're excited to have new energy in the school, so they want to help you. I know my current team, I could go to any of them and they hands down would be like, here, use this, right? And then thinking about the reverse of this is you have so much to bring to your team. I know it might not feel that way, especially if you're a newer teacher, but you've just been in college. You have all the latest and the greatest practices and ideas. You can help significantly by telling them like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Sometimes I will just make a copy of something and I'll put it in my team's mailboxes, and like they can throw it if they don't want it or they can have it. And a lot of times they're like, hey, thanks for sending that to me. Be a team player and really think about how you can bring value to your team, and then don't be afraid to ask for help in return. Tip number 4 is to think about your classroom management. This is huge, especially if you're a newer teacher and you're not quite sure what that's going to be like. To be honest, I felt like I did not learn a ton about classroom management when I was in college. I think it's one of those things that's hard to teach unless you're actually doing it for yourself. So something that I have done that has helped me a ton is read this book, Classroom Discipline by Becky Bailey. As you can tell, I've marked like every page. I read this for the first time last year, and it was a game changer for me. It doesn't only give you tips for your classroom, but it really starts with yourself and how you react to situations and kind of changing your mindset to be calm and to make decisions intentionally. One of the things it talks about that I always think about is when you're driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off. Think about your reaction. Are you somebody that yells and gets upset, or do you just take a breath and you're like, it's okay, I'm still going to get to work on time, we're good? There's different ways to react to things, and it all starts with yourself. So the first part of this is changing your own mindset, and then it's bringing that into the classroom. So I read this last summer, and when I started the year, I felt so calm with how I dealt with any issues or behavior in the classroom. One of the things it talks about that I love is that if a student's doing something that they're not supposed to, then you stop, you smile, and you take a slow breath. And usually the kids start to kind of mimic what you're doing as well. And your internal thoughts are, I'm safe, I'm okay, I can do this, I'm a good teacher. and then you move forward. Of course, there's like 8 million other things to do in here. Classroom management is one of those crazy things that it's such a puzzle with different pieces that all fit into each other. I think this is a great place to start and kind of give you that clear path on how you're going to view your classroom and how you're going to react to situations, and just be really consistent. Going off of this, something that, especially if you're a kindergarten teacher or first grade, you will find very quickly is that those first couple days of school, they matter with how you react to things. So if you are sitting at your teacher reading chair and you've got all their attention, you're ready to go, and one student blurts out something, maybe like, "Hey, I've read that book before," your reaction might be to say, "Wow, have you? I'm so excited to read this book. It's one of my favorites too." But right there, you've in some way told some students that if they blurt out after you've gotten all their attention, sometimes you might respond to give them that attention back. So I was really intentional this year that if a student did something like that because they're making an awesome connection, I would, "We have a rule for this. What is our rule in our classroom?" And they would all say, "Raise your hand if you want to talk." And then I would remind that student, "Can you raise your hand? And I'd love to hear your connection." And right then I've reinforced my rules without having to get upset because I didn't teach the rules the right way, or to give in to that attention without properly helping the whole class know what is expected. So these are the 5 rules that I use in my classroom, and we say them every single day right before we're about to start phonics. So rule number 1 is raise your hand if you want to talk. Rule number 2 is follow directions quickly. Rule number 3 is stay with the class. Rule number 4 is keep your hands to yourself. And rule number 5 is be kind. And I have found that those 5 rules really encompass most of what goes on in the classroom, so that if there is a situation or a scenario that happens, we can refer to those rules. So if somebody is touching a friend at the carpet, I will say, "Hey friends, what's rule number 4? And they all say, "Keep your hands to yourself." I will say, "Can you show me what that looks like to keep your hands to yourself?" Right? Those are kind of the ways that I start my classroom management, so that they know what is expected and they know what our rules are. And I just kindly remind them in a way that makes sense for them. That's not like a punishment, or it's not negative. It's just going through our rules and rephrasing it so that they understand what's expected. Especially in kindergarten, you cannot assume that they know anything, even though they do, but you have to set it up the way that you want your classroom to be. So really think about teacher books that you want your classroom to be like for your classroom management. Tip number 5 is to organize in a way that works for you. There are so many papers and so many things to get organized in a classroom that it's important to find sort of a rhythm that works for you. So the first thing that I do is I have a binder that has all of my important master copies for the beginning of the year through the end of the year, and these are the ones that I always use. So they have conference information, they have back to school forms, field trips, all of those sorts of things. So I'll open it and just kind of show you what I mean by that. So in here I always have my schedule, meet the teacher, so I can just make copies when I'm ready. This is what we put in their folder. I have transportation forms, special K information, so I know that if I need to make a copy of something, usually it's in this binder. Then for each month, I have a tote that has different file folders for each of the activities we do. So for, this looks a little crazy, I need to go through and organize this, but this is my folder for the first day of school. So when I look through here, some of my extra copies or my master copies are inside here. So I have the first day of school, and I have a little note that goes with it. Here's our self-portrait that we do. So then I put these in the order of how I typically teach them, so that my whole September files and crafts and everything like that are inside of my September bin. So So for Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, this is the craft and some of the materials. Clearly has been through a lot, but I just have this right here so I know how big of pieces I need to cut. I have examples to show the students and to put those up when they're making the craft. And it just reminds me of, oh yeah, that's what I do for this part of our unit. This is what I have. My September bin is one of my bigger bins along with December. The first couple months of school, I feel like with the seasons and the different holidays, they tend to be my bigger months, and then in January, February, I can kind of combine some months. So think about what works for you to organize your materials so that you can easily find things when you need to, because typically you'll need things in a snap. Tip number 6 is to be flexible. That is a word that you need to be as a teacher because things are always changing. You'll be trying new things and you will get ideas from administration and from supervisors on ways to switch things up or things that they are focusing on as a school. So definitely be flexible. Now at the beginning of the year, the way that I think about being flexible is my classroom layout. So you'll have your classroom laid out the way that you think it will work. And even from year to year, if I have the same classroom layout, sometimes that doesn't work for that specific group of kids. So pay attention to where the flow of the classroom is. If it seems really congested in one area, then you might need to switch up where those supplies are located. Or if it seems like this group of kids really loves the writing area where I have this narrow kind of countertop space, then I need to make that more accessible and get more stools and places for students to work over there. So make sure you're thinking about how can I change this to better fit my students? How can I help them to have a better day? Think about your seating arrangements too. I usually change my tables about once a month, but this past year, I had students that really thrived on routine. And really, most students do. And for the first couple of months, I actually kept their seats the exact same. And the students were fine. And when we did change the seats, it was totally okay. But you have to do what works for your classroom. You know, for me, with Instagram and all the amazing teachers that I get ideas from, I'm constantly trying new things and trying to make my classroom the best it can be. So be flexible. So as I was editing this video, I realized I forgot about tip number 7. So tip number 7 is to be prepared. And that goes off of some of the tips we've been talking about. I like to plan at least one day ahead. So if it's Monday, I like to already have Monday done, but that morning I'm prepping for Tuesday. And then on Tuesday, I'm prepping for Wednesday, next day. So if I can make copies for a full week ahead, I will do that so that I'm ready to go. Being prepared is so huge. I always think about when you have your observation and you have everything ready down to the T, how good it feels and how you think about, wow, all of my lessons should be like that, right? So try to be as prepared as you can with all your materials ready and all your copies made so that you're not frantic that day. It's also really important to think about your classroom layout for yourself and where all your materials are so you're not running around your classroom to get them. Is tip number 8, and this has to do with social media. Like I said before, we did not have a teacher community on Instagram when I first started teaching, so that would have helped me a ton, but it also could have stressed me out a ton as well. As I'm sure you've seen on Instagram, there are some teachers that have the cutest, brightest, most colorful classrooms, and you're like, oh my gosh, how do they do that? And then you'll see other teachers who are just as amazing, but their classroom is more simple and it's calm and there's not the bright colors. You have to see what works for you, but more importantly, what works for your students. So for my classroom, there are some bright primary colors in the classroom, but it's not overloaded. I always think about those students. I don't want them to feel like they're distracted by all of the things to look at. So when I go into my classroom, I actually sit down where the students sit and I look at the front board and I see what kind of things would catch my eye, what kind of things might distract me, where would my focus go. Same thing for when they're at their tables. The kids that are facing the back of the room for their chairs, what kind of things are they looking at? Is it helpful for them, or is it just cutesy stuff that's distracting and overstimulating? With social media, you can't do everything and don't expect yourself to be like some of those teachers. You have to do what works for you. So don't spend all your money at the Target dollar spot if you don't want to. If that's something you're excited about, go for it, right? But use Instagram as a way to feel inspired, not as a way to think about, I need to do this, and if I want to be just like that teacher, I have to do that. You were created to be a teacher because of you, not to be like another teacher. So really think about what feels good for you, what works for you, and that's what you should do. The next year, you can kind of add on or see like, this was too much in my classroom, I'm going to scale it back, and just find what is the perfect balance for you. But don't get overwhelmed on social media. Use it as a way to be inspired. Tip number 9 is to start each day fresh. I think especially in the primary grades, you will see this every single day. You could have a little buddy that has had the hardest day, and it just seems from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. he's had difficulty just doing his thing in the classroom. But the next day, he's going to come back to school with a huge smile on his face. And from an outsider's point of view, you would never guess that he had had a difficult day. Like, students come to school super fresh every single day. They're excited to see you. They're going to tell you about their hockey game last night, or they had a birthday party, and they're just like brimming with excitement. You have to do that same thing. I get to school early, the coffee has kicked in, I'm excited to be there, and at least the 5 minutes before my kids come, I take a breath and I just relax. I'm not running around my classroom, I'm not running around the school making last minute copies. That's my time to just feel present and get excited to see my kids. I greet each of my students at the door when they check in their lunch stick, and we do either a high five, I do a fist bump, an elbow greet, a wave. In some way, they greet me and I greet them. And it's just a way to start fresh and make sure that they feel valued and that they're welcome in this classroom. And I have found that that is really, really helpful to creating a great classroom community. And it's also helpful for me to know that no matter what happened yesterday, teachers have hard days too. You can start fresh every single day, and what an awesome opportunity to be able to do that. Tip number 10, the last tip, is to make time for yourself and be able to do the things that you enjoy. For me, I like to go to yoga, and it's kind of a sculpt yoga, so it's like upbeat music, we're lifting weights, we're doing cardio, but that really helps for me after school because there's a ton of breathing and being intentional and kind of letting the day go, and that has been really helpful for my own self-care. So that's my workout. That's also a time to just reflect and to let it go. I also watch The Bachelorette. I watch my favorite shows. In the weekend, I go and see my little niece. I see my family dog. We go to the movies. We go bowling. Like, there's all sorts of things that I make time to do because that's important to me. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And I know that there's been kind of a movement for self-care with teachers, which is amazing, but make that something that's intentional every single day. Think about even 10 minutes. You can find 10 minutes just for yourself to journal or to have a cup of coffee and just kind of decompress from the day. Think about how you can make time for yourself so that you can be the best teacher you can for your students, because really that's the most important thing, and that's why we're here. So those are my 10 tips for teachers. I hope you found a couple of those that you can just kind of take with you, little tidbits, so that you can start your year with a lot of energy and excitement and really taking care of yourself so that you can be a rock star teacher. If you have other tips that you have used that have helped you be a better teacher, leave them in the comments below so that we can all share them and talk about them together to improve every single day. Make sure you subscribe so you can catch more videos of kindergarten life. See you next time.